Hi, I'm David Dodge. Welcome to Green Energy Futures. Our electricity grids were built to manage power inputs from a small number of large power plants, and the grid was overbuilt to provide enough power for peak demand, that one time in the day or year when we all demand a lot of electricity all at the same time. The trouble is, the architects of this 20th century grid never contemplated a grid with hundreds of thousands of solar and wind projects, nor were they built for battery storage, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and many other things we call distributed energy resources. We simply cannot use those 20th century strategies to meet soaring electricity demand today, and besides, we couldn't afford to do it that way anyway. So, how do we make efficient use of distributed resources like wind and solar, batteries and EVs, and much more efficient use of existing grid infrastructure? One of the answers is big data, software, and smart grid technologies. We're pleased to present our full discussion with Sabine Erlinghagen, the CEO of Siemens Grid Software, based in Munich, Germany.
Hi, I'm Sabine, CEO of Siemens Grid Software, and we help grid operators to master the greatest challenge of the energy transition, especially distributed energy resources with software.
Okay, well, you said it. So what is the greatest challenge and what is distributed energy, just to be clear?
Distributed energy resources is basically everything else but a big power plant. So it's PV, it's EV, it's heat pumps, it's distributed wind sometimes, small biomass plants. So everything that is connected to the medium or low voltage grids and that produces energy or is capable of storing energy as well.
So have you just released new software, or what's the new thing that's here, and how is this going to make a difference?
We've just launched a software platform called Gridscale X. Gridscale X really thinks the grid bottom up, and with a view of being able to plan, operate, and maintain grids in an autonomous way. So far, there's a lot of manual interaction and a lot of brain power and individual switching actions that are going on and that need the human brain. The complexity that we're seeing, though, is the human brain is not capable of handling that anymore. So AI and an autonomous way of managing grids is needed to manage those distributed energy resources.
So the best example I can think of is, we've got 250 million EVs coming on the roads by 2030 by latest projections. That's a big problem, or it's a big resource, depending on how you look at it. And so if we rely on people to like I do, my EV is set to not charge between 4 and 8 p.m. every day, but I do that voluntarily. But if we rely on people to do that, the grid's going to blow up, isn't it?
That is pretty correct. So, if we want to get to those amounts of EV, and we don't manage charging, it will be very hard to keep up. Either we invest billions into more grid, which will be too slow anyways, because people are buying cars and producing cars faster than we can build the grid. So the only option we really have is manage those charging interactions in a smarter way. And their software can obviously help quite a bit.
And you're talking about doing that, not just with EVs, but with solar and many other resources, turning those into actual grid resources. Is that correct?
Correct. Some of your former guests said that the grids are most of the time used 40%. So there's quite a big capacity left in grids, but the one summer peak or the one winter peak, depending on where you are in the world, will drive the utilization up to 80-90% of that infrastructure. But it's only during that one peak. So it's all about intelligently moving consumption and production with the help of storage, with the help of human behavior to get more efficient in managing the grids and in using the infrastructure that we have. So enabling grids to keep up with your appetite to buy more EVs.
This is a big change for grid operators, isn't it, responding to this? Because historically what they would do, in my understanding, is they would just add more infrastructure and charge us for it.
That is entirely correct. And on top of that, even the incentive systems for those grid operators are exactly to do that, to build more infrastructure and get more money out of that. So what we need is not only a change in technology, we need a change in incentive systems and in a change in mindset of how we go about that challenge.
And so where are you have you started using this software, and where do you plan to start using it?
We absolutely have. And the way we do that is we think the grid bottom up. So we start with the low voltage grids. We start in the US with the pole top transformers and understand based on metering data, like what is the load and the percentage loading of each of those assets, and calculate backwards. So instead of going top down, transmission to distribution, we go bottom up and calculate backwards what's the ripple on effect on the infrastructure. And that gives you some phenomenal insights and increases your capacity and your ability to manage quite significantly.
I read somewhere that the average home connection capacity, we use about 8% of it on average. And so I guess this has a potential in businesses. I heard a number of 12%. So this has quite a lot of potential, doesn't it, to optimize?
And absolutely has. I mean, we, for instance, use Gridscale X with the distribution operator in Norway, in Oslo. And what they told us, they need to double their grid capacity in 7 years. I mean, if you wanted to build that infrastructure, you build a grid that you build 100 years long, and then you build it again in 7 years. It's just not possible. So what they do is they use our software to create the transparency and the actionability on where there's capacity and to shift the loads in a way and to respond to what is really happening in the grid on a real-time manner.
So a great way to help understand this is talk about the situation in Germany right now. Like, you guys have gone after renewable energy fairly aggressively. You, like many other jurisdictions, got to the point where there was all these pressure points, and because we wait until that happens before we respond to these things historically. What has happened in Germany? Where are you at, and how can this change that?
I mean, Germany sees a fantastic boom in solar, and we started to keep up with managing the grids in the right way. And there were some news saying like, oh, we need to stop and curtail solar. We can't connect anymore. So that is where I think smart metering infrastructure, quite honestly, would have helped to roll out faster. And that's, I think everybody looking at Germany from the outside says like, why on earth haven't you done that yet? And I think they're right. So that would have helped to deal with that situation in a much easier way. And now it's about catching up. And we're obviously helping with that. It's still managing without smart meters and getting the most out of it while we fix that problem.
So your software, just to be clear, does it work mostly or with the grid operators, or does it actually make the connection all the way back down to those distributed sources for the grid operator? Just help me understand like where it plays in the landscape.
It does both. And if you want to manage flexibility, and that's ultimately what this is, then you need to plan with flexibility, and then you need to act upon it. Planning with means if you expand your grid capacity, you need to know how much flexibility you can rely on, and not having to extend the grid further than the flexibility potential that you determined. But once you've planned with it and you've only extended your grid capacity to a certain extent, you also need to be able to act upon it. And then it's about, first, it's the transparency and the planning and to know what you can safely rely on. And then in the actual operations, to be able to switch, to be able to act upon the transparency, to act upon the situation in order to keep the grid stable, even at times where there's a lot of wind or too little wind or solar, or there's a lot of charging.
You know what's funny is I talk to a lot of utility folks and even CEOs of rather large utility companies. And when they talk about energy transition, they talk a lot about, reducing emissions, about adding storage, about the big solutions, the big traditional grid solutions to this stuff. But I don't ever hear them, almost never hear them talk about smart grid technologies or smart home technologies. So talk about how important this is.
It definitely is. And I think if we tend to talk about transmission grids, if we talk about grids, we believe that we actually have to flip the whole paradigm on its head and think about the local optimization first, and then the distribution grid to deal with the remainder. And that's entirely inverting the paradigm. If you think about grid operators, the paradigm that they're coming from is one where you can precisely control a big power plant. And now we start to think of PV or EV as small power plants that we precisely can control. But A, the sun is not controllable, and B, human nature and behavior will not be controllable. So we need to find different ways of human-centric management of those assets, and then the grid operator gets into a role of dealing with the residuals of that and being able to plan and to operate the residuals. And that's such a big paradigm change that it's even hard to describe or digest. And there's so many things within a utility that need to change in order to get there, that it's much easier to deal with the existing paradigm to say, give me more money to build more capacity to make more money. And if you can continue that paradigm, then that's the easiest way to make money. The route that I'm proposing is much more complicated, but is the only one that can deal with the challenge at scale. So we're still underestimating how fast those distributed resources will grow.
You know, I used to say, and again, this is just my intuition, that you can't manage a grid by relying on human behavior. But, you know, it was funny. I was looking at the stats from California recently, and with their time of use pricing, they've managed to cause a peak at 2:00 in the morning of EV chargers charging on the grid. They actually have almost too much happening at that time. Automating that process is very important, though, isn't it? I'm amazed at the results they got. Like, I was very surprised. So, you know, people usually say people are not going to pay enough attention, but apparently EV owners are paying attention in California. But that's not how we're going to manage the big grid, the global grid, the country grids going forward, is it?
I would tend to disagree to that statement. We will run grids based on human behavior, and we will find ways of influencing human behavior by price signals, by good citizenship, by believing in kind of working for the energy transition. I mean, the coupons that you cut in your supermarket,
that
it's not rational to do, but you still do it because it's well. And so we gotta think consumer, and we gotta think about what's in for the consumer, and how do we influence behavior with a win-win exchange ratio for the consumer to do that. And it's happening. If you look to the UK, people are reacting to those price signals. They go for, I manage your heat pump, I manage your EV, and I have a zero energy bill pricing. It's all about kind of thinking through how those programs can be done in a way that we, with big data, can predict human behavior in a way that allows us to manage the grids based on statistics, based on human behavioral predictions. And I'm entirely sure that this is possible. And again, if you look to the UK with the programs that you see there, it's happening. And you were giving the example of the Western imbalance market, which we know intimately well. It's happening.
But you offer, to your credit, you offer a new level of control over that and a new way of managing and making more efficient use of capacity on top of that. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's a fair way of putting it. I would say we bring the two worlds together, because ultimately you learn over time to what signals people react, and you translate that into safe mechanisms for planning. And you learn how much capacity you can actually control and how many things you can actually switch, and you convert that into planning. And the better you get with that, with the more data you gather about that. We do that in Rome, for example. We know how much people react to certain programs, to certain signals. And with that, we can adjust the capacity planning. And with that, we can then run the programs and run the grid in a stable way, relying on what is safe to rely on. And that's the connection that we're really making with that software.
I did a story on a small city in eastern Canada that had literally no energy production. Like they had zero. They were buying all their energy through an undersea pipeline from another province. And they only had diesel generation, which was costing them 55 to 75 cents a kilowatt hour. And it was only supposed to be used for backup. They installed 3 wind turbines. This is a small city, right in the city. And then they installed thermal energy storing furnaces. They incentivized their residents to install thermal energy storing furnaces that could store energy. I think it's up to 3 days. And to let the grid decide when those appliances were charged via smart grid. And with only 100 or 150 appliances, they flattened the curve on their wind energy.
Yeah. There's programs in the UK where if you live in the vicinity of a wind turbine and you're part of a certain retailer who owns the wind turbine, you actually get 50% of your bill when the wind turbine is turning. So people are actively using that, and A, you don't have the not in my backyard syndrome, and B, people are using the power when the wind turbine is turning because it's 50% cheaper. So you need to build less grid because you can rely on the energy being used where it's being produced.
So give me some examples of where your software is going to help us do this better, some tangible examples. So EVs, solar, whatever, yeah.
It literally is all of the above. So what we do is we take meter data and we take grid topology data and we overlay that. And with the meter data, what we do, we have very sophisticated disaggregation algorithms. So from the meter data, we can say, how much is an EV? How much is solar? How much is a heat pump? And we can disaggregate that and derive the level of flexibility that you will likely have at this point. So we know behind each asset in the grid how much flexible capacity of what kind do you have, and with what you can plan. And that's the power that is unfolding there is the overlay of the grid topology, so all the way bottom up to the actual meter data and the disaggregation of that meter data. So you can roll up the effects on the assets in the grid, and you can overlay that with where do you have, you can determine where do you have overload situation, over voltage situations, and you can match that with the ability to influence that flexibility. So you can avoid transformers to blow up. So at the moment, grid operators are running their assets to failure. So you wait until the asset fails and then you replace it. But what if you have mass failures? So you have run all your assets to a certain extent and then all of a sudden they all fail. If you have a supply chain that takes you 2 years to order something and you run out of stock, you all of a sudden have a very big problem because you have no predictability at the moment when those failures will happen. You have past experience from the situation where there was no EV, no solar. then it might hold the 10 years or 20 or 30 that you had in your asset books. But if you now start connecting EVs, if you now start connecting PV, then all of a sudden your failures coming earlier. You can't predict it. So you don't know what's happening, and you are having a ticking time bomb in your network without any visibility on how to manage that. And that's how what the software solves with this overlay of disaggregated metadata and the topology.
So what kind of metrics would you use, and how can you describe the potential of us doing this better using software like this? Like, how much more efficient is it? How much capacity can we gain? How do you describe that?
I mean, we see one topic which is really important is restoration rates. So we see that and hear from customers that they can restore outages in the low voltage networks 30% faster. So that not only is good for the grid operator, but also for the consumer, because obviously your power is on more stably. And we estimate that you can add 20 to 30% more capacity or more power over the same line with the technology that we're.
So it's kind of energy efficiency, but not energy efficiency in the conventional way. It's just efficiency. Shouldn't that make electricity cheaper? Shouldn't this be a force that actually could cause prices to not go up at least, and maybe be less?
I would definitely say so. Yes. If you use your existing assets better, then the amount of grid you need to consume more kilowatt hours is the ratio is better, and your cost will be down. So the more you flip the grid to the head, the more you make consumers benefit from use energy when it's cheap, and the more power you put over the same line, the cheaper it will get. So there is absolutely a possibility for the whole energy transition to, in the end, be greener and be better for the consumer cost-wise. And for me, those are absolutely no contradiction.
What are the implications for energy transition of these kinds of efforts and your software? And where can it allow Germany to go that is going to be helpful?
Look, you speak about Germany, but Germany, I think, unfortunately, is fast in EV, but not a leader in digitalization in that sense. So I would not put Germany as.
Well, use another example if you want, Sabine. I just picked Germany because that's where I'm talking to you. You can pick any country you want. Use Norway if you want, or wherever you want. I just want to know the implications for energy transition and how it'll make a difference in a country that has been struggling. You know, they've reached a certain point and now they're trying to get past that point. And how will this allow them to do that? What are the implications for energy transition?
I mean, the moment you have rather unhappy consumers, you have more outages, you have unstable grids, you wait for connection requests, whether you're a household or whether you are an industrial player, you wait for it for ages. And what this software can do, it can speed up the process. It can allow more connections to the existing grid. So if you build a data center, it can go to the grid faster. If you build a PV on your household, it can go to the grid faster, and it can be managed in a more stable way. And for instance, one way of doing that is giving conditional connection. So you can connect if you allow us to give certain amount of flexibility. If you are not charging at this time, if you're not using at this time. So those conditions are a way to connect faster and to allow the energy transition to speed up and not to be withheld by missing it.
And that's exactly the idea that worked in Summerside, the small city I described that had no energy capacity. They didn't have money to offer as incentives, so they didn't offer incentives. They said, if you buy these thermal energy storing furnaces and you replace heating oil furnaces and allow us to control them, we'll give you a 8 cent per kilowatt hour discount for the next 20 years on your electricity to run it. And that was good enough. but they're using future savings to pay for it, which is actually kind of clever.
But that's coming back to the whole incentive system that is so wrong. The only way to make money for a grid operator is to build more copper, and that's just not the smartest way of doing that, and it's the most costly way in effect as well. And I mean, I've seen pricing schemes where you actually don't pay an energy bill at all if you give control over your assets within certain boundaries to your retailer. Hey, then it's a zero game, right?
That's not a hard sell. Unless you're freezing in your house or something, which is not going to happen, obviously. Otherwise, it wouldn't be proposed. But so what's the grid going to look like 10 to 20 years from now down the road, which actually is, a lot's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years. If we look at the statistics and project them forward, like change is happening way faster than most people realize.
Yes. So I think the energy transition will be more decentral than some of us think. So the investment in the distribution grid will be significant. We definitely need more grid, because if we double or triple the energy consumption, there's no way of going without more grid. But the way the grid's planned and run will be significantly different. You will rely on data, you will rely on statistics. You're not going to go about it in a deterministic way, but in a probabilistic way. And with that probabilistic way, you need AI and autonomous grid management to give you proposals, to act upon situations in an autonomous way on many different places simultaneously in the grid. And so the planning and the operations will be very significantly different. And hopefully it will be a very positive future for all consumers, because it's cheaper, it's less effort, and it's cheap.
So let me give you an example, and don't feel intimidated by this. It's my own home province. So say you're in a place that has the best sun and wind resources in all of Canada. That's my home province. Say you're also the fossil fuel capital of Canada, which is my home province. And, it was funny because our coal guys, as recently as 15 years ago, were building new power plants because they kind of owned the politics of the province, and they thought they could do whatever they wanted in spite of what the rest of the world was doing. And guess what happened? We phased out coal completely. So we phased out power plants were just built 15 years ago or less than 15 years ago, and it's gone. But now we replaced a lot of it with gas, and our government seems to have a bit of an allergy to renewable energy, even though it was booming here until they put a new policy in place. So what they talk about, though, as the big challenge, that's just a little prep for the actual question. What they talk about as the big challenge is we have a lot of natural gas. It can be quite high proportion right now, although we do have about 33% potential capacity that's renewable energy. So it was starting to come pretty strong. But what do you do in January when the sun's not shining and we go into the wind doldrums and everybody's running these heat pumps and charging their EVs?
I mean, of course, you need long-term storage options for that. And I do know that Canada has fantastic hydro plants. And there, I guess, working cross-province, I don't know which province you work in, but Hydro-Quebec has quite a number of hydro plants that can give you storage possibilities that go through those winter days. One answer is looking system-wide and making the system larger than any political kind of delineated area. So going as large as needed in order to balance the system, where you can benefit from wind further north or further south of yourself, where you can benefit from hydro that is at a distance, and think the system bigger than state or province borders would be the first answer. The second answer is the more EV that we get and the more progress we make in storage technologies outside of the natural hydro storage, there is also in heat storage, there's quite a number of technologies that are out there that can help you bridge at least some distances or some time frames in very cold winter days. And I know that Canada has more winter than we have here. So I envy you for that.
Well, I'll tell you, Sabine, that last winter or last fall, we put a heat pump in the cabin I'm living in right now. And it was a TOSO rated to minus 35, and it got to minus 41. So there were 3 days last year, and that I've never seen minus 41 ever before in my life. Just so you know, like we all say we see minus 40 in Canada, but let's talk about the actual number. I've only seen that once in my life. And it happened to be last winter, right after I installed my heat pump. So it worked down to its rating of minus 35. And I had a backup electric system come on for 3 days. And that's it. That's all it took.
Yeah. And I mean, it's those very small occasions, right? Where I think humans are capable of finding ways. And the good thing is that good insulation also helps quite a bit, right?
So so what else should I ask you, Sabine? Sabine, what do you want to talk about? What have we missed?
I think it's the topics that are most dear and near to my heart is this topic about, and if we keep thinking copper, we keep thinking control, and we really don't think that we don't trust that human behavior can be reliable enough to work upon and can be influenced enough to work upon. And at the moment, we are shielding the consumer from price signals, from the market, from whatever. While if you look into countries like Finland, they're exposed to the market, or they can expose themselves to the market. Or if you look to the UK, then it's actually something that people happily embrace, and you can actually influence much more than you would have initially thought.
So you've modified my skepticism for human behavior by saying that big data can help us enormously with working through that.
And I think that the thing is, if you think about a grid operator who classically worked with large power plants, it's not their profession to know UX and consumer behavior and marketing and how to influence people with kind of force or loyalty systems. But other companies like Amazon, like airlines, like take Airbnb, they know exactly how that works. Yeah. They know all about marketing. They know all about probabilistic behavior. They can influence prices on a very detailed level, but it's just competencies that are not in our industry. And I'm a firm believer that we need to bring those competencies into our industry, and with that, change the behavior and make the whole thing digestible. People want to be part of solving the problem. And if you give them an easy enough way to be part of solving the problem and make it a win-win situation, I think that's entirely possible.
And this totally leads into the last area of discussion, which I actually forgot about, which I think is really important. You alluded to this, but the evolution of electricity and grid policies is part of the challenge of enabling all of this stuff. I see it here. I think you talked about it already, or at least alluded to it. Where you come from, or maybe it was Norway. I can't remember where it was, but they have to evolve though too. Like, for example, where I live, if I can charge my EV during the supper peak, I voluntarily don't. I get no incentive for not doing that. It's just my knowledge. But I pay 9 cents a kilowatt hour when the grid is paying $1.20. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, when they're getting it for free from wind, I'm still paying 9 cents. So that's not very efficient. So how do policies, grid policies and electricity policies and retail policies, how does that need to evolve so that we can do this really well?
I mean, in some markets, it's already done. So if you look at Finland, if you look at the UK, you can absolutely use flexible prices. I think policymakers are afraid of exposing that complexity to people. And I think admittedly, without smart technology, it's very hard to do that. So I think there are two things over the past that have been dramatically changing, three maybe. First thing, the fluctuation of energy prices will only go up. So between the highest peak and the lowest negative price, it will fluctuate. So the need for a balancing there is absolutely there. Secondly, the amount of electricity that every one of us is consuming, it's going up significantly. So the portion of your household income that you need to spend on electricity is going up because you electrify your heating, you electrify your driving, your mobility, and everything else around, right? You have more computers, you have more, so there are more larger consumers and batteries and everything that you have in your house. And the third factor is that you now have technologies that can manage the complexity for you and that can automate the whole thing for you without you having to go and switch, do and think and look at the watch and do. But I mean, apps do this for you. So if you take all these three things together, more individual consumption, higher fluctuation, and then as a resolution, the technology, you can kind of resolve that with a great UX and with a great consumer experience. It's something that where we shouldn't be shy in asking citizens to embrace that and offering them a market to for people to come up with those smart solutions and incentivize that in the right way.
Well, I want to ask you about what the most important changes are in countries that have already done this, like Finland. But as a preamble to that, we have a company in Canada called DC, as in direct current, Bell, BEL. It's just the name of the company. But they make an integrated solar inverter, dual port DC EV vehicle charger with built-in AI-powered energy management smarts. They don't sell them in Canada because our grid policies, there is zero benefit for me making that purchase and operating it in Canada. There's zero benefit. It would only be altruism. I'd be helping the grid. Nobody's going to buy one of those just to help the grid. But they are selling them in California and Texas and New York and other places like that. They're actually quite successful. So what are the policies in Finland that countries like Canada need? We have this problem all across the country. Like, there's better provinces than others, but I would say that's the one area we lag quite significantly in.
I mean, there's in some countries, and I assume Canada is one of those, there's a ban for variable pricing, and the maximum kind of complexity that you dare to expose a consumer to is day and night tariffs. But that's about it. And the same is true in parts for Germany. So you're actually politically not wanting the complexity to be exposed to the consumer. And if you go to Finland, they had in their homes, they partly have 35,000 kilowatt hours of consumption a year, 35,000 kilowatt hours of consumption. That's electrical heating, that's saunas, that's electrical driving. So you have a very large consumption. And with the war in Ukraine and the Russia sanctions, the prices went up from 4 cents per kilowatt hour to 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So then consumers had a choice to take a 40-cent flat rate instead of a 4-cent flat rate, or go to variable pricing. And everybody, I made it like a sport. Everybody I talked to, I interviewed almost, like, what did you pick? And everybody said they went to the flexible prices, and they installed a way to manage their homes in a smart way. They had all their apps, and it was a fun conversation. It wasn't something that was done to them. They felt smart about the way they managed through that situation, and it was a positive thing. And it was a conversational topic about at dinner tables of how smart you managed this situation and what deal and trick you did. So it's just about opening up and exposing to the energy markets. And then the middle piece in between is for retailers to design tariffs in a way that it's consumer friendly. It's not fixed price or full exposure. But what about you pay half if the wind is blowing, or you pay nothing if you give me control over X, Y, and Z? So that is, I think, where the retailers can come in with the right technology in their backbones, design those tariffs in a way that they yield the desired effects of both purchases to be done at low costs, as well as then, in addition, the grid effects that you can see.
So it is variable pricing is the key, and being able to take advantage of that either from the grid perspective or from the homeowners or business owners perspective. Yeah. Interesting, very interesting. And, it's like you said, if you try to sell time of use pricing in Canada or even use that phrase, you're going to smash up against a brick wall until we're into a crisis, because people assume their prices will go up. They don't understand that variable pricing could allow them the chance to save money.
Yes. But in any case, to switch the thinking and to literally let go of some old paradigms and flip it on its head is a thing that's very hard for people to do.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Bye.
It's complicated, but regulatory reform and smart grid software, AI, and even human behavior can be leveraged to increase our utilization of our overbuilt grids from about 30 to 40% up to 90%. This is to accommodate more solar, wind, EVs, and as demand for electricity soars. We'll still need other changes, such as plenty of energy storage, strengthened inner ties between grids, and radical changes in electricity policies and regulations. But equally as clear is we need the 20th century model of electricity grids and the mindset that goes with it to go the way of the dodo bird. Thanks to Sabine for this thoughtful discussion on evolving our grid for a low-carbon future. For Green Energy Futures, I'm David Dodge.